In 1936, laborers digging near the ruins of Ctesiphon, once the capital of two Persian empires, pulled a small clay jar out of the ground. It looked unremarkable, about 15 centimeters tall, sealed at the neck. Nobody thought much of it until it reached the desk of a museum researcher who cracked it open and found something that shouldn't have belonged to the ancient world at all. His name was Wilhelm Koenig, a German researcher working in the laboratory of the National Museum of Iraq. Inside the jar was a cylinder of sheet copper, closed at the bottom, and inside that a rod of iron, completely oxidized, held in place by a plug of asphalt. This is Archive of the Ancients, and today we're looking at the Baghdad Battery, an object that some believe proves the ancient world had electricity nearly 2,000 years before Alessandro Volta built the first modern battery, and that mainstream science almost universally rejects. The physical details matter here. The copper cylinder measured about 26 millimeters across and 9 centimeters tall. The iron rod sat inside it, sealed at one end with bitumen. But here's the detail that changes everything later in this story. The iron rod poked out through the asphalt plug. The copper tube did not. One electrode was accessible from outside the jar. The other was sealed completely inside it. Koenig had a theory ready-made for this discovery. He'd spent years examining ancient Mesopotamian silver objects coated in impossibly thin layers of gold, and he suspected they'd been electroplated, a process that, as far as anyone knew, required electricity and hadn't been invented until the 19th century. In 1938, he published a paper proposing that the jar was a galvanic cell. Fill it with an acidic liquid, and the copper and iron would react to generate a small electrical current, possibly used to electroplate gold onto silver, or perhaps for some kind of ancient electrotherapy. There was just one problem lurking in Koenig's own research. He'd also observed a Baghdadi jeweler using a ceramic pot to electroplate gold onto silver in exactly the way he imagined the ancient jar working, except that jeweler was doing it in 1938, using a technique invented in Birmingham, England in 1839. It wasn't an ancient secret passed down through millennia of local craftsmen. It was a 19th century industrial process that simply found its way to a Baghdad workshop. Still, the idea took hold. After a science fiction magazine ran a sensational article about the jar in 1939, an electrical engineer named Willard Gray, working at General Electric, built his own reconstruction using copper sulfate solution as the electrolyte. He reported that it worked, for a short time at least, generating a measurable current.
4 decades later, a museum director in Germany named Arne Egbrecht went further, claiming he'd wired together several replicas of the jar, filled them with grape juice as the electrolyte, and used the resulting current to electroplate a thin layer of silver onto another object. Proof, he said, that ancient Mesopotamians could have gilded objects this way. It's a striking claim. It's also one that, when a fellow researcher went looking for the original documentation decades later, simply couldn't be found. No photographs, no written record. Nobody involved could reproduce the results. The most rigorous public test came in 2005, when a television science show built 10 handmade replicas of the jar, filled them with lemon juice, and connected them all in series. The result? 4.33 volts. Left running overnight, the array produced enough current to visibly electroplate a small copper token. It was a genuinely interesting result, and also, according to the archaeologists who reviewed it afterward, completely beside the point. Here's why. Remember that detail about the iron rod sticking out of the seal while the copper tube stayed buried inside it? To connect 10 jars in a working series circuit, you need a wire running from each jar's exposed electrode to the next. The Baghdad jar has no such connection point on the copper side. There's no archaeological evidence of wires, terminals, or any linking hardware ever found with these artifacts, not at the original site, not at any of the similar jars discovered nearby. Whatever chain of jars a television experiment can build in a studio, nobody has ever found evidence that the ancient world built one. There's more working against the battery theory. In 1930, just a few years before the Baghdad jar surfaced, archaeologists excavating at Seleucia, a short distance away, uncovered 4 nearly identical sealed clay vessels. When they opened them, they didn't find electrolyte residue or corrosion patterns consistent with electrical use. They found decomposed plant fiber, tightly wound cores, and in one case, what appeared to be a rolled papyrus scroll. Nearby, at Ctesiphon itself, another expedition found 6 more vessels of the same type, some containing bundles of corroded iron nails wrapped in fiber, others holding sealed bronze rolls. These jars were found stacked alongside so-called magical bowls, ceramic vessels covered in protective incantations meant to ward off demons and curses. To researchers who study this period, the pattern is familiar. Copper for protection, iron nails for binding, a written charm sealed inside and hidden from view. Not a battery, a spell in a jar. By 2012, one of the leading experts on ancient Iraqi archaeology put it bluntly. She didn't know a single archaeologist who believed these objects were batteries. The oxygen in a sealed vessel would have stopped any current almost immediately. The bitumen seal, which would need constant maintenance for a working cell, makes far more sense as a permanent seal for something that was never meant to be reopened. And if the jar really had held an acidic electrolyte for centuries, the copper should show corrosion residue that simply isn't there.
And then there's the ending nobody saw coming. The original Baghdad Battery, the one Koenig examined in that 1930s laboratory, survived for decades in the collection of the National Museum of Iraq. During the chaos of the 2003 invasion, the museum was looted and damaged along with thousands of other artifacts. The jar's current whereabouts are unknown. Whatever answers it might still have held, if any, may never be tested again. So what was it really? A crude ancient battery whose actual purpose has been lost to history? Or a sealed charm meant to protect its owner from harm, misread by a researcher already primed to see electricity in everything he touched? The physical evidence leans hard toward the second explanation. But the object that could settle the question for good is gone, and nobody knows if it will ever resurface. Let us know your theory in the comments, and if you want more stories of ancient mysteries still waiting to be solved, subscribe to Archive of the Ancients.